and welcome to Scale Your Sales podcast. Now, my next guest is founder and chief sales scientist at Cerebral Selling, former vice president of commercial sales at Salesforce, and author to the best-selling book, Sell the Way You Buy. Now, I had listened to David on another podcast, the Sales Evangelist, and I was so impressed. I immediately brought the book and contacted him on LinkedIn and invited him onto the show. So you're in for a real treat. Welcome to Scale Your Sales podcast, David Priemer. David, now I've got to say, first of all, I love the titles, some of the titles in your book. It's really enticing. Trouble at the happiest place on earth. Brilliant. Love it. Absolutely love it.
Yeah,
so,
lots of people. Go ahead. Lots of people, especially, when you read on Amazon and you read like the table of contents, they're like, this sounds like a good book. It's funny how you say that. People just like the titles. And surprisingly, they didn't change very much during the editing process. I guess the editor liked them as well. So I'm looking forward to having you dive in.
Well, I suppose actually it really encompasses what you say, doesn't it? It has to be attractive to the customer. And you have to, add value, but seduce them into it. So, well done. You've seduced them.
Well, you know how they say you shouldn't.
Lots of listeners.
They say you shouldn't judge a book by its cover, but apparently people do. So you got to have a good cover. You got to have a good. But look, it's like anything else, and not to unnecessarily get into this too quickly. But for example, like a sales pitch, people think oftentimes the purpose of a sales pitch is to communicate the sum total of the value you can add. But it's just like a headline in a newspaper article. It's just to get you to read the first sentence, and the first sentence is to get you to read the second sentence. And so everything is cumulative. The cover, the pitch, the cold call tactic is just to draw you in to earn the right to continue the conversation. Yeah,
absolutely. So tell me a little bit more. There's various concepts that I've picked up that I haven't really heard from other people in the way that you explain it. One is the perception of value, and the other is emotional pathways. Mm-hmm. I'm going to dive right in. So perhaps, you can enlighten us.
For sure. Well, this concept of value, as sales leaders, and I understand there's a lot of sales leaders listening to this call, oftentimes we go out and we tell our sales teams to go out and sell value. Go sell value. Tell sell value, sell value. And this was our battle cry. I worked at Salesforce for 5 years, and this is what we would tell our reps. But the problem is a lot of people confuse the idea of value with ROI, or return on investment. And so when we say as leaders, go out and sell value, it really means go out and tell the customer that if they spend money with us, that they will either make more than that money or they will save more than that money. And there's a business case to be made. That's what we mean by selling value. But the word value, by definition, the former is an objective statistic, right? It's something we can calculate and put in a box. Value proper is a subjective feeling. And this, if you're sitting there listening to this podcast and you ask yourself, what's something that you spend money on that another person would look at and say, that's ridiculous. I don't know why she's spending money on that thing, right? So that's the concept of value. Value is discretionary, right? It's a subjective feeling. And people say, well, that doesn't apply in B2B sales. People don't buy based on feelings. So first of all, I will go toe-to-toe with anyone any day that says, feelings don't play a role. Feelings are 100% a role. But have you ever heard the phrase, Janice, no one ever got fired for buying IBM, right? No one, whatever the big gorilla in your space is, no one ever got fired for buying IBM. What does that mean? Does that mean that IBM has the best solution? Does that mean that IBM has the most return on investment for what we're spending? No. What does it mean when I say no one ever got fired for buying IBM? Janice?
It's the perceived lowest risk. They can't do wrong.
That's right. Now that's important if risk is something you value, right? If you're saying, well, I don't want to go buy a product from this startup who I've never heard of before, this small company. So there's a high perceived, and I'm not going to get fired. If I buy it and it doesn't work, I'm going to get fired. No one ever got fired for buying IBM. It's saying, I care about risk. Now, we all know that a lot of these small startups and fledgling companies do manage to attract buyers because those buyers align with the value of working with that company. They're more agile, they have influence into the product roadmap, the customer service is better, whatever it is, because that's what they value. And value and ROI, completely separate things. The idea is if you want to be successful in sales, you have to sell to the things that your target customer values, not the ROI.
Yeah, yeah. And, the process is understanding by discovery questions what that is, and also weighting it as well. So what is number one and why? And you go into a lot about the why as well.
Yeah. So, it's funny when we get on our discovery calls with our customers, one of the here's the problem, because we see this all the time. You get on a call with your customer, you have a lovely conversation, you speak for a long time, you ask lots of questions, you take lots of notes, and then you go back to your CRM and you try to figure out, okay, where should I forecast this thing? And then your manager comes over and starts asking you questions about the opportunity. And you say to yourself, oh man, I forgot to ask that. Okay. And you don't know where to forecast it. So you had this very lovely conversation, but you didn't go into the call really being clear about what you wanted to know in the first place. And you didn't target your discovery process around that. So that's kind of step one, the thing you need to do. Step two, and this kind of goes back to your first question of, selling emotions and feelings. The idea is, like I said, we all buy feelings in our normal everyday lives, but oftentimes the way we execute our sales motions, whether it's how we describe what we do or discovery, we're not really leveraging feelings very often. We're almost like computers. Here's the list of questions. It's like a polite interrogation. Here's the list of questions I would like you to answer to kind of put you in a box. Here's what my product does. We're a platform that does, A, B, and C and can help you. And no one cares. No one cares because we live in a world of infinite numbers of solutions, so much choice, a million salespeople who, by the way, customers don't like talking to, right? And then you kind of smush that all together, and you need to use tactics that are far different today to connect with modern buyers than what we've traditionally done. And emotion is the quickest way to get to that value, to create that rapport, to kind of help the customer understand how they will benefit by working with us.
So what do you mean by emotion? How can a salesperson utilize that to better ascertain the value? Because I've seen you have these questions, but it's almost like I need to ask this question to match them up to this solution. Whatever happens, I need to get them to that solution. So all of these questions is driving down to lead them to the one solution. So there is no emotion involved, but it's very targeted. So how does a salesperson negotiate the emotional field?
Yeah, well, what you just described there is a tactic we really need to stamp out in the sales profession, which I refer to as leading questions. So, let's say I'm a purveyor of sales training, and I say, Janice, wouldn't it be better if your team was better equipped to connect with modern customers and they executed with science and empathy, and you had better revenue and better customer reviews? Wouldn't that be good, Janice? Right? That's a logic trap. No one wants to, because if you say yes, then it's almost like it's like tacit compliance to allow me to do whatever it is I want to do in my little sales world here. So the idea behind emotional awareness is to realize that you shouldn't be asking these leading questions. One of the easiest ways, so I'll give you a couple examples in terms of how do you use emotion. So when I ask you what you do, Janice, what do you do? Or you ask me what I do. I might say, I train salespeople, or you sell widgets, or we have a platform that allows IT providers to do whatever, right? And no one cares because there's a million people that do what we do when we answer that way. One of the quickest ways, now, when people ask you what you do, that's almost evolved. Now, sometimes what people will say is well, we can help you increase your revenues by 30%, right? And so we kind of talk about not what we do, but the benefits, like the outcome. I would take it a step further and say, you shouldn't be talking about what you do in terms of the content or the benefits. You should be talking about the problem that you solve for the customer, the pain that they have, right? So if you ask me, what is it that I do? And I say, I train salespeople, not so exciting. If you ask me what I do and I say, well, I've been in sales for 20 years and I've realized that people love to buy things, but they hate talking to salespeople, right? Now you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I have a sales team and people probably don't like talking to them. I don't like talking to salespeople, even as a sales leader. And now you're leaning in and you're saying, David, tell me more about what it is that you do, right? So I'm leading with the pain. And there's lots of different ways you can lead with the pain. You know, my third startup, we had an online feedback, coaching, and performance solution for people at work. And we led with this message of people love feedback, but they hate performance reviews, right? Or men love to dress well, but they hate to shop. And so you can use all of these very emotionally pain, problem-driven statements to describe what you do. And that's a much quicker way to get into the mind of your buyer, because people are attuned to avert losses, to avert pain, right? So if you can speak to those pains, especially if those pains are hidden, you're going to have a much better chance of converting and engaging that customer.
Interesting, interesting. Okay, so what's your view? We're talking about the buyer, the seller, you're the kind of customer world, but let's talk about the whole kind of industry, sales industry, and then more specifically B2B. What's your view on diversity? Has it changed? Has it progressed enough? Or do you feel there's a lot more work to be done? And if so, having you've worked at Salesforce, a large organization, and I'm sure they have lots of policies and programs. But, like when we look at the whole industry, has it evolved enough to be, a diverse sales industry? Because certainly the buyers are very diverse.
It's getting there. We're not totally there yet, I think. And it's interesting actually to see how many companies are out there trying to tackle this problem. One of my clients today works with in the recruiting space to try to stamp out, confirmation bias and diversity bias in interview processes, because we unwittingly do that. I had a friend of mine who works at Shopify the other day posted something to LinkedIn saying, hey, look, I'd like to increase the diversity of my sales team, but when I look at my network, they're all people that look like me. And so how do I get beyond that? So I think we are doing better. I think, again, it also depends on the organization you work for. And I love organizations like Salesforce that are absolutely leading the way in creating diversity, having a chief diversity inclusion officer. I'm trying to stamp that out in their recruiting processes. Also just creating an environment where, for example, if you're a mother who needs to bring their children to work, having daycare at the office, like just simple things like that. It's all very well and good to say, oh yes, we want to be more diverse and inclusive, but if you're not creating the environment to do that, and you're not kind of making those behaviors visible, then it becomes very, very difficult. So I feel like we are doing a better job. I'm excited to see more organizations trying to tackle this problem systemically, both on the operational side and the technology side. I still think we have more to go, definitely more to go.
Yeah, okay. So, we talk a lot about the customer's experience, and, although we have a long way we have more to go in terms of a diverse workforce. How do you bridge that gap in that you're trying to deliver experience to a customer, you're trying to understand the customer's perception of value, however your workforce, your sales force, has a limited view of the world, not their fault, simply because they all look pretty similar. So how do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the challenges that exists, and I talk about this a lot in my book as well, is this concept I refer to as experience asymmetry. Because diversity can be, let's say physical, socioeconomic, whatever it is, but it can also be in terms of, experience and skill set. And one of the biggest challenges that exists in sales, and this is like a very deep hidden enemy that it took me a while to kind of uncover. And the symptom is this: you have sales reps, especially a lot of young sales reps, your business development reps, your younger sales reps, who are trying to call on older, more experienced buyers whose job they've never done. So you have these like very young, enthusiastic sales reps trying to, call these experienced buyers, and that creates a gap. And I call that gap experience asymmetry. And it could be all sorts of, diversity metrics, years of experience, industry. And what happens is it becomes a very difficult thing to diagnose, because you say, well, I have this wonderful sales team and they're making lots of calls and they're calling the right people at the right time and they have the right script, but then there's no pipeline production. And so I actually had this problem at Salesforce And so I started to look at, so I ran small business sales for the East, I'm Canadian, but I ran small business sales for the Eastern US. And my sales reps in New York City, and a big shout out to them, they would always hustle the most calls. And I would have reps from time to time that would have lots of activity, but actually very little pipeline to show for it. And I wouldn't understand why until I started listening to their sales calls. And what I heard, imagine you're listening to kind of this setup, young, enthusiastic sales rep trying to call on a more older, more experienced buyer whose job they've never done. And I'm just closing my eyes and I don't even care about the words. I'm just listening as though I'm, an innocent bystander here. And I'm like, it just sounds to me like you're bothering this customer. It sounds to me like you're afraid. It sounds to me like you don't think you're adding enough value. And I can hear it in your voice the same way I have 3 kids. When one of my kids comes to me and is about to hit me up for something, right? A lift somewhere, I want to download an app, or, I want a snack. I can tell immediately, right? Just by the way they approach me. And so in sales, it's the same thing. If for whatever reason I feel that there's emotional barrier, meaning I don't feel like I'm adding value, I don't have the same background as you or the set of experience, and yet I'm being tasked with calling you and trying to convert you, I can feel that, right? Because those buyers are thinking, who the hell is this person? And why are they calling me to talk about this thing? So there's actually a very real problem. And there's a lot of different ways to solve that problem, but it's very real and something that oftentimes organizations don't think of in terms of like the kind of the diversity gap, right? There's lots of ways that we can overcome that. One of the ways is just simply, and I say like video calls like this. Video calls like this where people can see you. It removes this psychological concept of abstraction, like someone cuts you off in traffic and you start swearing and shaking your fist and you do these things that would be inconsistent with how you would be in a normal everyday life because you're a lovely person. But you wouldn't do that if you knew who that person was. Yeah. You get to do that because of this veil of anonymity, right? And so part of it is just doing more video calls is a great example of just getting closer to our customers to kind of break down those barriers. And especially when we meet people, then we can see in their eyes how much they care about us and our business and how we can help. It has a tremendous impact on your ability to convert them.
That reminds me when I worked for a customer experience consultancy, and I remember for AOL, this was so many years ago. So, and I set up, it was in Germany, Paris and London. So the various people from the organizations, from the designers, the technical team, marketing, sales, all of that, we had to set up customer experiences with their customers. So if a customer sat in their bedroom on their bed and did the experience, the technician or designer had to sit with them, and they could not say anything because, if designers designed a certain path,
correct,
customers always find the shortcuts. They always find the better way. They always find the ways that haven't been designed into the system. They are the best designers. They couldn't say anything. They had to watch them do it. When they came back after doing the customer experience trials, they were just completely changed people because they had a newfound respect being in the customer's shoes, in their environment, understanding their language, understanding how they found those shortcuts. They came back refreshed and completely new, and they designed a better product. They did a better sale. All of these things about being in the customer's shoes. Sometimes you need to lift them up, take them out of the environment and put them in the customer's environment because it's a revolution. And then when I say about respect, they really did. Their level of respect went really high for the customers. It's really powerful.
Well, I totally agree. And in fact, you can create some of that magic, certainly the ride-alongs, and we would do a lot of those. And I totally understand what you mean by kind of the user experience. It's almost, in my third startup, we were encumbered by the fact that as founders, we were sales and marketing people. So we were very comfortable talking to customers, but then we didn't design a product that from the get-go, didn't require any discussion, which is really, I think, oftentimes what you want to do. But one of the tactics that we would often do a lot in my sales organizations was bring customers in. Sometimes I refer to this is kind of a funny term, the CEO petting zoo. And what I mean by that is, when you see CEOs in the wild.
I'm glad you're explaining that because my mind is going in another direction.
Well, no, here's the thing. Everyone's told to call the CEO, try to get the deal done. And what happens is when you see CEOs in the wild, they'll bite your hand off, right? I called it the CEO petting zoo, where I would bring in CEOs, customers, not customers, to talk about their business. I want you to tell my team how decisions are made in your company. And especially if you've already used my product, I want you to tell the team, and it doesn't have to be the CEO, it could be whatever your target buyer is. I want you to tell my team the value you've gotten from the product. Because we all have win slides and case studies. I'm calling bullshit on those things, not because they're not good, but for most people, it's just an academic exercise. They're reading these things on a piece of paper and then recounting that to someone else. But when you hear it from someone in person, you are absolutely able to communicate that value with tons more conviction than when you read it. And in fact, an experiment that Adam Grant, who's a professor at the Wharton School of Business, did with the alumni department at the University of Pennsylvania, he had the alumni BDRs who traditionally call up people, alumni, and they ask them for donations. And those donations are used to fund scholarships for, underprivileged or people. What happened was he actually had a recipient of these scholarships come in to talk to the BDRs about, here's how this scholarship changed my life. Here's what I would be able to do. And because they told that story one-on-one, the revenue from that BDR team increased 400%.
Yeah.
They could have read the story and as a case study, but is hearing it firsthand. That's the power of abstraction and that emotional connection.
Yeah. Yeah. Really powerful. Yeah. So what one tried and tested strategy would you offer listeners to scale their sales?
Just one thing? Okay, that's good.
Just one. You're only allowed one. There's only ever one on this show.
No, that's good. So the thing I leave people with, and so the title of my book is called Sell the Way You Buy. And the reason I called it, thank you. Thank you so much. The reason I called it Sell the Way You Buy was because that was just the thing I kept saying over and over when people asked me this question. And what does sell the way you buy mean? It means, first, two things. Don't use tactics that wouldn't work on you. So a little bit of the golden rule. Oftentimes in sales, we feel that we get to go out and treat people in a different way than we would like to be treated because, it's okay, we're in sales. So at a very basic level, just do that. But the second part of it is really commit yourself to understanding the pathways and mechanisms by which human beings make purchasing decisions of any kind, right? So you can align your sales motion that way. So if you want to be good at sales, the overarching statement of sell the way you buy, use the science and the pathways, and don't do stuff that wouldn't work on you is the best advice I can give.
Yeah, yeah. So why the science bit? This seems to be your thing. Why the science bit?
Well, because for so long, the way we learned how to do sales was just from the person that taught us, our managers, right? And none of those things are actually necessarily scientifically proven to work. In fact, some of the tactics that over the course of time people have been taught have actually been shown to decrease their sales effectiveness. Now, for me, we all got into sales in a different way. No one ever grows up and says, you know what I want to be when I grow up? I want to be in sales. I actually started my career as a research scientist. So this was 20 years ago, and not even in psychology. I was in engineering. I was building computer models. And when I got into sales by accident at the turn of the dot-com boom, I started to realize that sales, like anything else, is like a system. And there's variables and all sorts of forces and so on. So I started to unpack that. Of course, there's the nuance of human behavior, which is very, big wild card, big source of error. But that's kind of where I got into kind of like the science of selling. Like, what are the pathways, mechanisms? How do people make purchasing decisions? But even down to things like tone and emotional intelligence and these things. And the great thing is that, and I don't fault our ancestors who used to sell in the old school methods, because we've actually, through research and science and studies, have learned things, biochemically, hormone release, all these things in the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years. So, why wouldn't you, especially since the world of buying has changed so much? It's not like math or medicine or accounting where these small increment, the world of buying changes so quickly. You need to arm yourself with tactics that have been like not hearsay, not, just do this because that's what I did. Tactics where you can understand from first principles why they work. And the beauty is, if you arm yourself with these tactics, you'll be able to execute them with more conviction because you know why you're doing them. And part of the challenge that exists in modern selling is oftentimes people do things without knowing why they do them. They do them because someone told them to. And it's funny, we talked about business school. So I teach at a business school here as well. And actually, there's a business school here in Canada that uses my book as the textbook for their course. So I zoomed into the class, I think yesterday, in fact, or a couple of days ago. And, there was a young lady there who said, hey, look, I worked at this company and they gave me a script to read. And I just said, you know what? This doesn't feel like words that another human being would say to someone else, which is unfortunately what you get a lot with scripts.
Yeah.
And so she said, I just changed it to suit more of my style. And I found that my conversion rate just, went through the roof. So this idea of just being a human being, but really a human being who's armed with the understanding of how human beings communicate and buy will make you an unstoppable sales force. So that's, where the science came from, my background combined with, this is just the way the world is going.
Yeah, which is excellent. So I'm going to write a review. I absolutely have loved talking to you. So who is your hero or shero?
I think I remember this question. So I often talk about my wife.
So you better get it right.
Yes, my wife, who we've been married for 18 years, and I think we together for 24. I should get that right. But we started dating when I was in the science lab, and she's through 4 startups, through the whole journey. I'm a cancer survivor as well. So you know what? I think you need to have someone who stands by your side and encourages you to do what you love, reminds you of what you love and why you're doing it. And she teaches me so much. So she is my absolute hero.
Sounds like a wonderful woman. Thank you for sharing that.
My pleasure.
So how can listeners get hold of you, David?
Yeah, so it's very easy. I like to give away a lot of things for free. Mostly, the book, unfortunately, it's you got to pay for that, unfortunately. But everything else I give away for free, and you can find it on cerebralselling.com, which is my website, just one word, cerebralselling.com. And the book is called Sell the Way You Buy, and you can find that on Amazon or anywhere you buy books.
Thank you so much for coming on to Scale Your Sales podcast, David.
Oh, my pleasure, Janice. Thanks so much for having me.